Hold on one second. Hey everybody, we live. Got some the African national anthem going on here, not the South African national anthem. So it's similar, but yeah. Woo. Let me put on thank you for joining us, everybody. We appreciate you guys coming on another episode of TATT Talks. And I am here today with my good friend Tiniso Muyoba. You can see our picture is in the background there. I am really excited about this conversation. I say that to let me put it, I'm excited about all the conversations I have with the individuals at African Think Tank who have been, with African Think Tank involved in either being a participant, vendor, in some way capacity they have, African Think Tank has been a part of their lives. And so each conversation I have has a special, unique link or impression upon me. So when we talked about special needs with Ashik, I have a passion for people writing. And so we have our two authors who are here. So there's always a connection with somebody that's bring on for TATT Talks. And this is a special connection because our guest, Tiniso Muyoba, he is from Zambia. And I spent almost a year, shy of 1 month with my family in Zambia. And I was thinking, sometimes Africans have that second country they love. Some who travel a lot, also been to a few, and I've been to, a few countries, and Zambia is like my second home now, apart from Chad, because of the time I invested in there, the friendships I had, the crucible I went through in the country with the organization I was with, and the outcomes of the Zambian people and how they embraced me. Oh, Zini, do you know Zini? She's from Zambia. She is based in Washington, D.C., and she has a great podcast. We'll talk more about her. She groups some podcasters together, African podcasters. So thanks for joining us. She goes, Zambian. Like that. That's your brother right here. That's for sure. All right, Tiniso, we'll get started. Let's wait 1 more minute for a few people to jump on. Welcome everybody. Again, if you have comments or questions, please put them out there right now so that as I read them, I can interject them into our conversation as well. Okay, Assorted Immigrant Stories podcast. Thank you, Zenith. I'll make sure our brother Tiniso knows about that because he has a passion for Africa, but definitely a passion for Zambia. And we'll talk more into that because we already met once before and through one of my other initiatives called Speak African, and we had a really in-depth conversation. I actually got a lot of feedback, Tiniso, from that one conversation we had. So let's just go ahead and jump in. I don't want to, we're 3 minutes in, I don't want to waste any more time. I've been speaking a lot. So introduce yourself, my brother, Zambian Kuchalo. So correct me if I'm wrong with it. I love that term. Tell us about yourself. And we're going to start with Zambia. Born, grew up, with family, things you enjoyed, things of that nature. The floor is yours, brother.
Yeah. So so my name is Tiniso, right? It's not necessarily a common name in Zambia, right? So my name is Tiniso. It's an Ngoni name, right? Which means truth. Last name Muyoba, and I think you had my middle name on the flyer, right? And middle name is Malwa.
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
I consider myself to be cross-cultural in the Zambian context, but most Zambians are. My first name is Ngoni. My middle name is Lenje because my father is Lenje and my mother is Ngoni. So I was born in Lusaka. Born in Lusaka, but 3 months after I was born, my family came to Seattle because my dad was coming to do his PhD at the University of Washington in Seattle. So we were there for about 4 years, and then after that we moved to Manchester in England. so because he had a fellowship and went to teach there. So stayed in
Okay.
England for just about a year, and then moved back to Zambia. Right. So when we moved to Zambia, we lived in, first got to Lusaka. So my dad was teaching at an institution called the National Institute for Public Administration, known as NIPA in short.
Okay.
So he taught there for about 4 years, and then decided to go into the NGO or nonprofit space. So, but before I talk about that move, right? So when we got to Lusaka, obviously, uh, um, even though I was born there, this was my first time, coming into this Zambian context. So I think I was about so I started school. Went to a school called Rhodes Park. It's a private school in the middle, close to downtown Lusaka. Then stayed there for a little bit. Then moved to a public school called Jacaranda, also in the middle of the city. Um, Learned how to speak Nyanja.
Nyanja,
Yeah.
people in Zambia, what's up?
Learned how to speak Nyanja. Got addicted to it. And so had a lot of friends. Enjoyed my time because we lived at NIPA itself. It was both a school and it had staff housing right there. And then so when I was about 8, about to turn 9, we moved to Kasama. So my dad went into the nonprofit NGO space, mostly doing these kind of donor-funded projects around the agricultural space. Supporting farmers, trying to get farmers to kind of grow into this medium scale operations. So we lived in Kasama for about 4 years. During that time, I learned how to speak Bemba.
Bemba.
Yeah. So Kasama was also great. Made a lot of friends. Finished my elementary or primary school education at that point. Moved on to boarding school right there, just outside of Kasama, in a school called Mungwi. And then, so that was 8th grade, 9th grade. And then 10th grade moved back to Lusaka to another boarding school called David Kaunda. And that's where I finished school. But over that period of time, we moved quite a bit. Moved from Kasama, went to Mpika, stayed there for about 2 years. Then from there, I went to Chipata, right? So there for, let's say just about 3 years.
Yeah.
It starts to become fuzzy because now I'm in boarding school, and that's really my life at that point. And then finally, my parents moved to Kabwe as I was finishing school, and just before I came to the U.S. So that's kind of been a bit of my story in terms of the places that I've lived, and
those locations are north of Lusaka, more in the Copper Belt area, or
north of the Copper Belt.
North of the Copper Belt. Okay.
Yeah, so Kasama was the capital of, may still be, was the capital of the northern province. Zambia at the time had nine provinces, and the northern province was capital by Kasama. But that province got split into two, northern province and Muchinga province. I can't, because I studied my geography back in the day. I don't really have the new facts down pat. So I just know that one of them is in Muchinga. I don't know if Kasama is in Muchinga now, or the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then Mpika is also in the northern province, but Chipata is on the east. So we went from the northern province to the eastern province, then came back to central province. Yeah.
Okay. Any movement south of Lusaka towards like Livingston, that area?
No, not really. So we didn't really get a chance to live anywhere south of Lusaka.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So all that
but
movement.
but I
Yeah. Go ahead.
did enjoy some time visiting that southern region, and I
Yeah.
actually got to visit that southern region just before I came, right, for the first time. So I went we were going city to city, was kind of a work thing. We were going or town by town, going south to, oh no, we went to Livingston first, sorry, and then worked our way up to back to Lusaka. So I went through just
Yeah.
about every town on the I think it's also Great North
Yeah.
Road. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think the Great North Road. Man, you're bringing
yeah.
back so many memories, brother. It's like I know you got a lot of memories as well. So with all that
Yeah.
moving around, were you able to really establish some friendships? Because it seems like you were 2 years here, 3 years there, in and out. So how
Yeah.
was that growing up as a kid, haven't moved that much?
Um, so I did. Interestingly enough, I think just about every location, or every station, that place that we uh, lived, I still am in touch with one or two people from each place, right? From Lusaka, because we lived 4 years in Lusaka, so I still have friends from back then, right? So from second grade onward, or second grade, well, was there from, yeah, just before first grade till fourth grade. So I have people that are friends from that time. I have a lot of friends from the Kasama years. The Mpika years, not so much, mainly because I was in boarding school at that point. So in the Kasama years, I was at home, right? So I transitioned to boarding school just before we moved to Mpika. So that um, uh, I only have maybe a couple of friends from Pika that I'm in touch with, and then the Chipata years were just before I finished school. So I stayed in Chipata for like on a continuous basis for maybe about a year after I finished school. So I have friends from that year or 2 years or 3 years that we were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I have a whole bunch of
That's,
friends from Osaka because I was in boarding school there. Um, I spent a bit of time there even after school. So yeah, so I've got a bunch of friends from every part, and kind of being
yeah.
able to live in all these different places, um, kind of exposes you to just a whole lot. Even just
Hmm.
the ability to both speak Nyanja and Bemba fluently, even though my Bemba accent can kind of go in and out.
Yeah.
But it's just great to be able to go back and forth, and sometimes even when I'm thinking, I might speak to myself in Nyanja, I might speak to myself in Bemba.
Bemba.
It's just fun to
Yeah.
know those, to have that, at your
Yeah.
fingertips.
Is
Yeah.
is the um is the Hungry Lion popular uh up north there too? Because
You,
that was
you,
one
you
of the
know,
famous things in
here's the
Lusaka,
deal.
and that's how
I think about it from time to time. That's my confession. I think about Hungry Lion from time to time.
the Hungry Lion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good spot, man. That's the chicken
Yeah.
place of Zambia. And you
Mhm.
speak to small towns, and I'm thinking the towns that I visited, Mazubuke,
Mazabuka. Mazabuka.
Choma,
Hmm.
Mazubuka. Sorry, Mazubuka. Thanks for correcting that. Choma. Is it
Palomo.
Kalomo?
Yeah.
Yeah, those towns, man. I wish um had I been there longer, I would have spent more time
Yeah.
in those, and especially Mazabuka, which is kind of in between. It's very beautiful and kind of got the history of that. But
Yeah.
the whole country, Zambia, is just beautiful, um, in such a way that's so breathtaking. And so one of the things I've been thinking about as you talked about all those different towns is how are the towns in between the major cities? So people can talk about Lusaka and you can talk
Yeah.
about Livingston and I don't know the major, but in between those, you have so many small. And this I was thinking about that about Jamena, my own capital, and Mundu and those towns, and really speaking to stories that exist in those places and bringing them to life and giving them space. So you sharing your moving in those different areas just kind of
Yeah.
mustered up that thought. So Um, let's get into space now. We've been, thanks for sharing that. And so how did you what was your journey back to the States? Because again, you were born there, you left when you were young, Seattle.
Yeah.
All my Seattle folks, I lived in Seattle too. I lived in SeaTac when you flew in. I lived there for about a year and a half. So went to school there in Auburn. I think it was Auburn, Washington. But again, tell me, how was your transition back to the U.S.?
Yeah. So I so my actually I my sister had come was in Texas. I can't remember what year she came. Maybe that was 99 or 2000, somewhere there. And at the time, the University of Zambia was going through, quite a bit of turmoil. There was a lot of like political unrest. Um, there was a lot of demonstrations, university closures, all these different things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that impacted my ability to, first of all, get in when I wanted to get in. So there was a bit of a delay in admission because there was a whole academic year that got interrupted, right? And so this pushed everybody about a year out, right? And even in between that, when I actually got into the University of Zambia, just a few months after that, there was another interruption, right? A long interruption.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I decided it it was time for me to look at a different avenue in terms of an education, right? And so that's when that whole process began, right? Started looking at schools in Chicago, in the Chicago, Illinois area, Dallas, Texas, and finally found a school that met our needs, and that's when I started the whole process, the whole application process. Got admitted, came. First, I started off with junior college. Went through the whole junior college to 4-year
Mm-hmm.
university track. Right. Started off at Navarro College. Stayed there for a little bit. Went to Northlake College. Finished off my junior college years. Then transferred to SMU. Then so I studied economics at SMU, and then kind of graduated. So that was kind of the the coming back to America. It was
Yeah.
precipitated mostly by kind of I guess dreams that were seemingly being interrupted.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and this desire to kind of get this completed. Yeah.
No, I think you share the similarities of moving schools, like the similarity you growing up moving towns to go to school. So you're a mover and a shaker. So you got the moving
Yeah.
part down, and you're doing the shaking
Well,
part as we speak.
well,
Yeah. So
well, some things have changed. I've been in Dallas for actually, I'd say about 24 years. I think today. I know, yeah, a
how long
couple of days.
again?
This is 24. Yeah,
24
24
years.
years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as of 2 days ago. So I have stuck in one
Wow.
place ever since. So maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe
Stuck in one place.
I'm pushing back against the
Yeah.
against my
You're pushing
upbringing, right? So
That's right. You're like, I'm sticking here. I want to welcome Stefan Bati. He's a Zambaza podcast from Kenya. So welcome, Stefan,
oh, okay.
joining us here. So if you have any questions, Stefan, just put them out there. He says a truly multicultural Zambian. Yeah, he's definitely traveled around your country a lot. So if you have questions, please ask them so that we can make sure your questions get answered by Tiniso. So tell me, you graduated SMU. What was your focus of study, and why was there that particular focus?
So I majored in economics. So when I came, my initial plan was to combine computer science and economics, right? Uh, but after going
Mm.
through junior college, I did some IT, coursework when I was in junior college, and I decided that I was just going to focus on one thing, right? Get the economics part out of the way. But I had I hadn't my interest in economics really started pretty early. I'd say when I was about 10, I was in about sixth grade. Um, we had these. So in Zambia, television broadcasts would start at about 5 p.m. Right, so you'd watch your cartoons, etc. Right, and then you'd
Mhm.
watch the regular programming, and it was the only at the time it was the only television channel, right? So you'd kind of start with kids programming, then there would be the news, then there would be more kind of adult. Well, let me not say adult, but more programming that was more tailored towards adults, right? So there was a program that I used to watch with my dad called Business Review, right? And even as a 10-year-old, I somehow started getting interested in things like interest rates, not interest rates, exchange rates, right? I started asking my dad because my dad had a bit of an economics background, right? He had an economics and population geography background for his undergrad and PhD. So I'd ask him about, how do these things work?
Mhm.
Who determines why it's a $1 to 25 kwacha exchange rate, right? So he'd give me
Mhm.
a little bit of insight, even at the age of 10, 11, 12, right? And what it really meant, right? So I started getting interested in that. And that was also the time that we were transitioning from a one-party system to a multi-party system, right? So we were going from a more centrally controlled economy to a more liberalized economy, right? So you'd have finance ministers come in and talk about this transition and about different things that they were doing, how they were trying to get investors. I know you're probably familiar with the structural adjustment program uh,
Mhm.
uh, that a lot of countries, African countries, adopted. So what the plans
Mhm.
were there. So even at a young age, I was following as much as I could understand, right, all these different changes and different developments. And so I think that kind of triggered this interest. But at the same time, I was a bit of a science nerd, right? So I was
Mhm.
fully into science. I was at all the science fairs. We had this thing called Junior Engineers, Technicians, and Scientists, right? So I was heavily into biology. Yeah, heavily into biology. I even thought I was going to be a doctor at some point, right?
Okay.
So, but I went to David Kaunda, which was more of a STEM kind of school, more of a
Yeah.
STEM focused school. I think 11th grade, I really started thinking about like day to day. Okay, yes, I love biology. I love mathematics. But day to day, I started kind of trying to visualize what the day to day would be and what it would really mean. Right now, you're not really doing the science per se. You're
Mhm.
dealing with patients, you're dealing with the actual interactions. Was that really kind of a fit? So at that point, I really thought economics would be something that I could see myself doing on a day-to-day basis, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Incidentally, from I'd say about from sixth grade, I was about 10 to ninth grade, I had also indicated to my dad that I was really interested in things like computers, all that kind of stuff. So my dad
Mhm.
would get me like professionals that would kind of tutor me on some of these things, right? On how to use a computer, different types of programs, what they do. So on my holidays from school, that's what I'd kind of spend my time doing, kind of like a extracurricular things. So computers were kind of new at the time, right? And there wasn't a lot of access, but that was something that I think kind of really gave, had me have this kind of dual interest in tech, a little bit of tech, as well as a little bit of business and economics, how economies work. And so when I was coming here, that's why I wanted to kind of meld those two things together:
Mhm.
the interest in computer science, information technology, economics, how economies work, and so now I found myself working kind of in the at the confluence of those two things, right?
Mhm.
Of IT and and business process, right? So that's kind of where this interest in economics stemmed from. Yeah,
No, that's good. I'm glad you shared that so
yeah,
that individuals can know that story and how you wanted to bridge those two things. Because it seemed
yeah,
like you had a multifaceted interest,
yeah,
and and a lot of our interests, we think they stand alone, but they
Yeah.
don't. There's some segue or some merging or some type of collaboration with another type of
Yeah.
industry. We had Zenith when you were talking about TV shows that you watch your cartoons. She mentioned a Roger Ramjet
Roger
or
Ramjet. Yeah.
Ramjet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Roger Ramjet. Yeah.
yeah, I guess that's very
Uh,
popular.
it was. Yeah. I think it was
Okay.
like yeah 70s era cartoon. I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Stefan, again, he has that podcast. He's mentioned that North Lake College was the ritual passage back in the day for all Africans. Like it was a
Oh yeah.
melting pot of diverse
Oh
cultures.
yeah. There
So
was a ton
yeah,
of that was there. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
kind of most Africans made their journey there and then moved on to
Yeah.
other places.
Exactly.
Also, I want to also give a shout out to I think Hilaire Silo. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you for joining us. You can tell us where you're from, and if you have any questions, please let us know. And then another fellow Zambia, Nathan Nkama. I think he
Nathan.
said, "Hello, gentlemen. Interesting conversation." He has a very great podcast as well, and he does a
Yeah.
news type of podcast and really Zambian focused. I don't know if you follow some
Yeah.
of his stuff.
It's
Yeah.
called Zambia Blog Talk Radio.
Okay.
So
Yes.
yeah, he broadcasts on Saturdays. I think it's at 9 a.m.
Okay.
9
Yeah.
a.m. to 10 or 10:30 somewhere there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I
I want to
know
start. Yeah.
I know Nathan Kama very well. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Even back in Zambia, we crossed paths before we came here. So
Yeah. Awesome.
Zambia's a small place. Yeah.
I love that. That's truly what Zambian Kuchalo, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you speak to let's you speak to that term because I remember when we were conversing. I don't know if that was a newer term you said was coming out in Zambia, and but it has a very powerful significance for
Yeah.
Zambians in particular. But I think it's a tie into African
Yeah.
in general.
I think it's fairly, let's just say it's fairly recent. I can't say specifically when it emerged, but I would say in the last few years, maybe last 3-4 years. I may be wrong. Maybe I'm late to the party, but it's really kind of an aspirational term, right? In the sense that it speaks to this desire for Zambia to come out of um, I'd say relative insignificance, if you will. Probably that's the wrong word. I'm looking for a word, but um, more into the limelight, right? Where Zambians take center stage in certain areas, right? An example, a good example would be one of our star soccer players, women's soccer players in the and National Women's Soccer League in NWSL. Her name is Barbara Banda. She's huge in women's soccer. I think she was probably MVP of the league. I don't know if that was the actual award of last season. Um, our Zambian women's soccer team does really well. Our Zambian men's soccer team historically has been significant on the continent. But I think a lot of Zambians feel like now is the time for Zambia to kind of come into the limelight on different in different areas, right? Whether it's on the economic side, in the entertainment realm, um, um, uh, in finance, and in the global finance. They're just in different spheres, right? So that's where that term comes from, and then it's really an aspirational, speaks to the ambition of Zambia and Zambians on the global stage. Um, yeah, and it's kind of a rallying cry. So yeah, I kind of fell in love with it. Yeah.
No, and I think you mentioned her because the Women's African Cup of Nations is going on right now,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
Zambia lost
Oh yeah,
unfortunately
no,
to I think they lost to Nigeria.
let's not talk
Uh,
about that.
yeah, I'm just
Just a bit
saying,
of
but
heartbreak
there's
here.
still but there's still a powerful team. I don't know why
Yeah,
they call I think they call the Copper Queens,
Copper Queens. Yeah.
Copper
So
Queens and stuff,
yeah,
but
the Zambian soccer team goes by the alias. The men's goes by the alias Chipolo Polo, which basically means a bullet, and since Zambia is like a major copper producer, it's basically a copper bullet. So that's where that copper queens comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they play valiantly. We're not going to talk anymore about it. But I think Zenisa is second most expensive player in the world, just to give context. So Sampa, the great on Obama.
Sampa
I
the
think we
Great
can't get,
yeah.
right to that
Sampa the Great
statement there.
Sampa the
Obama
Great
list.
she's a global music artist that's come up with a lot of really innovative kind of music. She was born in Zambia, I think, and lived in Botswana, and I think she was going to school in Australia, and really went global, right? Stratospheric. I think if I'm correct, she did some music for the Black Panther franchise. If I'm not, yeah. And she's kind of one of those notable Zambia Kachala people, right? So yeah, that's what he's speaking to.
And I like that in this sense, brother, is that, we speak about Africa and, it's enormous beauty and it's a place for visiting as well, but the talent that emerges from there. And sometimes it's unfortunate that that sometimes has to go somewhere else in order to bloom, but the roots still stick there, are still planted in Zambia. But I think with technology, more people are able to actually have roots and bloom from Zambia, but getting, as you said, that spirit of whatever particular country, any country. I think any Chad could take that, could say Chad Kuchalo. Let's get out there, and Chads are doing that, and kind of emerging out of Ubuntu in a way. So that term, it resonates with me when you first said it and explained. I was like, yeah, that's something there, and it doesn't always have to be in the. I think we follow famous people because they can speak for us generally as well, because it really packs a lot of, one person can have the eyes turn on a particular country. But also, I'm also a grassroots person. That also applies to the everyday individual making an impact in the community in a significant way, whether it's their neighbor or a school or a business. That is you're never gonna hear about it, or it's not gonna be written in the history books or pop up on some international media, but to be equally as important, that there's a part that we all play in bringing that message forward. So
and I think just tacking on to what you just said, right? Like you said, the limelight always goes onto individuals, a small select group of individuals, but really the change that really impacts a whole group of people is typically through a groundswell, right, of individuals like kind of being empowered in some form or fashion, right? So it's more about groundswells. It's more about kind of movements, emerging changes in how people live or how people self-actualize, right? And that's really what's kind of a difference maker. It's not necessarily widely heralded in most cases, because it's not necessarily typically sudden, right? It's more kind of an evolution, right? It's more over periods of time, 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, right? You see these massive changes over these kind of windows of time, right? It's a lot of times it's looking back, you're like, oh yeah, I remember, between this year and this year, this happened, right? A lot of times when you're in the midst of it, you don't really understand the significance of it. And how it really impacts the future. So so I totally agree.
Can you talk to us about? I'm going to just with this subject, the Zambian Economic Chamber of Commerce, because that's something you were. I think
it's still it's
something in your.
It's still in the works. It's still in the works. Just as I think, just as anything ambitious, sometimes there kind of there can be fits and starts, mainly because a lot of times it's new ground, right? It's new ground. You're looking at the realities. So you have a vision, and you have to look at the realities of implementation, right? Implementation has more pieces, right? The vision can be broad, right? But the actual implementation has a lot of moving parts, right? That you have to think through strategically, kind of day by day. Um, but just to kind of give kind of a feel of what the objective or the impetus is behind it is basically looking at, let's just say, because we've talked about coming to America, right? What the journey was, right? And if I look at the African community, or at least the Zambian community, I'll talk about the Zambian community because I'm a little more better versed on kind of the evolution, right? When we came, a lot of Zambians were we had a small grouping of Zambians that maybe knew each other at the time that they came, right? And that was the support structure, right? In school, you went to school with the same people. You kind of um, navigated college together. You navigated transitioning into life in America together, whether it's getting licenses, establishing a credit score, all those kinds of different things. You kind of navigated together. But with the passage of time, you started seeing this kind of emergence of African associations, or Zambian association in Dallas Fort Worth, or you see a Kenyan associations of Kenyans and whatnot. Um, but in my estimation, the next logical transition, right, is a transition into a grouping of Zambians or even Africans at large, right? And that ties into my kind of interest in the African think tank. The next logical transition is a transition that's more focused on development of Africans or the African diaspora from the perspective of entrepreneurship, from the perspective of being able to build business and professional networks, from the perspective of being able to bring knowledge, whether it's knowledge about different industries, just basically bringing knowledge, different types of resource networks, right? Whether it's and resources come in different forms and fashions, right? Whether it's uh, capital resource, wisdom as a resource, knowledge as a resource, networks as a resource, whatever those networks
Experience.
look like, experience, right? And it's not so. For instance, when I'm thinking about a Zambian American Chamber of Commerce, it's not necessarily just about Zambians, right? It's connecting the Zambian diaspora to the society around them, outside of how they can get connected as individuals, right? And so that is basically the impetus. That is kind of the drive there. Um, um, I think a lot of Africans are inspired um, by South Korea. Not South Korea. Sorry, I'm thinking about Singapore and their transformation and how strategic and how they thought through uh, their transformation, right? And I think that a lot of times we think about governments in terms of development, right? We think about what the government must do, but I think what's more practical and what's more logical is to actually have kind of what I call citizen-led development, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Whatever access we have, right, as a diaspora, um, being able to set an agenda, right, that in a way dovetails with what a government might aspire to, but might not either have the access to do or the information to do, or even just the uh, bandwidth to do, right? Because people have these like 5-year terms, right? Terms in
Mhm.
office, you can only accomplish so much, right? But if you have something that's more citizen led, right? The the what you call the horizons are a lot longer, right? You could have something that you pursue over a 15, 20 year time frame, right? And that can be handed off to like-minded people, right, over generations, right? Politics is more fraught with different interests, right? That are at variance, right? And so a lot of plans, a lot of strategic plans get interrupted, right?
Mhm.
A citizen-led thing is more likely to have continuity, and is more likely to be somewhat tapered by have certain interests a little bit tapered by the greater vision.
And I think as you were talking, this question came up, so I think it may tie into it. Talk about the Zambia had the copper boys, the phenomenon from the copper boom, which again, maybe give us a little history background about for those who don't know. And then the question is, what became the next wave of economic development of the newer generation, and which resources did the country diversify to, and what impact did that have?
Sorry, let me try to understand this. Zambia had the
Yeah. So I think we could really break it down to three parts.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So I think the question is basically, okay, so Zambia has historically been known, and I think at one point we were the biggest copper producer on the continent.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think we're second behind Democratic Republic of Congo.
Mm.
And that was, and probably still remains, our major export. Um, still remains a major export. In terms of diversification, I'll say this much: there have always been efforts to diversify to different types of products, different types of from an export perspective, but we are still overly indexed towards copper, right? We are still heavily weighted towards copper. And that kind of has been our Achilles heel economically, because copper is referred. Copper has a nickname. It's called Dr. Copper, right? And the reason they
Dr.
call it,
Copper.
yeah, in the
Yeah.
in the economic space,
Okay.
they call it Dr. Copper for the simple reason that copper can be an indicator of booms and busts in the economy.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
So if you want to get a pulse on the global economy, look at the price of copper, right?
Hmm.
Because it speaks to what's happening in the industrial space, right? Is China's manufacturing industry thriving, or is it waning in some in some regard, right? So that kind of drives the price of copper, right? So once you start seeing it kind of decline over time, and you see projections in terms of the purchases of copper, right? In terms of what the markets are saying, then you start to get a sense of what the next couple of years will look like, right? And so, because it is so heavily tied to the global economy, when there's a recession, it hits us really bad, and when there's a boom, um, we get some benefit, right? And I say we get some benefit because the mines are typically not locally owned, right? They're not Zambian owned, right?
Yeah.
So there's a cap on the upside, right? There's a cap on the upside, and that's unfortunate, right? So you get all of the you get all of the hurt and pain from the
Mm-hmm.
recession, right? But you don't get the maximum euphoria or the maximum benefit from the upside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So from a diversification perspective, I know we're trying to diversify a lot more towards agriculture over the last
Yes.
few years.
Good segue. I wanted to get
Yeah.
into that. Yes. Speaking of
Yeah.
that.
Unfortunately, was it last year? We were heavily impacted by a drought, like once in 40, 50 years kind of drought. So we had huge power outages, because most of our electricity generation is from hydro, right? So those droughts were heavily impactful in that regard. But it looks like we're coming back, and maybe in the next few years, I think a lot more capital will be applied to the agri sector,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot more capital is being applied also to the energy sector, right? So in terms of electricity generation, solar, we just got an announcement, I think it was this week, about a new refinery I don't know if you've been to Ndola before on the Copper Belt.
No, I haven't been to
Yeah.
Ndola. Yep. Love to go, yeah.
So there looks like there'll be a new refinery in Ndola, right? So we'll see how that goes. So those are the two sectors that I'm hearing a lot about
Okay.
in terms of outside of copper.
So I know you said your father worked in agriculture as far as
Yeah.
NGO. What does that work? And then what is your personal viewpoint of agriculture in Zambia?
Yeah. So my dad, the work that my dad did was mainly support for small and medium scale farmers, right? Because growing up in the 80s, most Zambian farmers fell into that category. The same is the case today. And I don't see a way. I don't see a way out of uh, um, developing country status without a strong agricultural base. I don't think mainly because food security has already been an issue, right? Whether when we have droughts, food security is an issue. So one thing that has been on my mind is the fact that Zambia has the northern region, right, where I spent a lot of my formative years, is a region that is typically not severely impacted by droughts, right?
Mhm.
I know this because the last time we had a very severe drought was in 1992. Okay,
Mhm.
so 1992 we got hit by this drought, and I remember because maize is a staple, right? Or
Yeah.
anshima, or
And Shima.
millimil, right?
Yeah. I love some
Countries that
Shima.
that's a staple. If there's no
Yeah.
millimil, then everybody starves. It doesn't
I
matter
know.
if there's rice available, right?
And Shima. We
You
would we
have
would
to have
buy
anshima.
we'd buy chicken. We'd buy what's the lions the chicken. You already forgot the name. But we'd buy the chicken and
Hungry lion, yeah.
yeah, comes Hungry Lion. I'm thinking Crazy Lion, Hungry Lion.
Uh-huh.
But our students would still want Nshima. They literally cooked Nshima after eating the chicken.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like,
Yeah.
okay, that's now we've eaten. So go
Yeah.
ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So I remember during that drought, that we had a shortfall. We had a shortfall of maize, the maize crop, right? We just didn't have enough to feed the whole country, so we had to import corn from the U.S. Right? I think we had to import corn from the U.S. And you know how over here, corn is kind of like what they call yellow maize. It's kind of
Yeah,
a different. It's a different variant.
yeah,
The taste is totally different. And I remember I remember I told you I was huge into science. So I went for a science fair because I was representing the northern province at this national science fair. So I went to Lusaka for a couple of weeks, stayed at the University of Zambia, and we had shima made from yellow maize, right? And it was just not the same, okay?
yeah.
Right? But the northern province had enough maize to cover uh, their needs, right? Because there's enough rainfall in the northern province, Machinga, Lopula, typically, right? Um, and I don't know why we haven't taken advantage of that simple fact, right? That simple geographical fact, right? That we have this slightly different climates, right? And this one is more it's kind of should be a safety net for us, right? The northern region should be a safety net for us as a nation, right? So that if we ever have a shortfall, the northern region can pick up the slack and still keep us fed through droughts or through different kinds of things, El Ninos and whatever, right? So that's one thing that I think we really need to do, and that's really kind of been on my mind.
Mhm.
We haven't put enough capital into what's a basic thing, right?
Yeah.
Food security is a basic thing. It's a
It's,
basic it's a basic requirement for any
mhm.
kind of civilization, right? For any empire to thrive historically, right? This is just a fact of
Yeah.
being alive as a human being, right? So if we don't take care of the basics, right, even what we talk about with regards to Zambia Kuchala will ring a little bit hollow. You know what I mean? So that's basically my stance, right?
Mhm.
We need to put more into that.
And I'm glad you stated that. I just put up this comment by Stephanie said my mom refused for us to eat that maize corn when they imported in 1984 when Kenya faced a drought.
Oh,
Um, he has also another pertinent question. Zenith, I'm waiting for your question. But this one said, in terms of geopolitics, how has the Chinese investment affected the Western countries' involvement in the country's infrastructure, security, and development? What have you noticed as far as the diaspora? Okay, this is why we're going to bring you back, because we got a little way. These are questions that pop up that have an in-depth things that we could spread out. But let's answer this question here. So, yeah.
I wasn't ready for a talk, a discussion on
We'll take
economics,
this and
but
then we're gonna start landing the plane.
you see, I'm not a practitioner, but I think I pay enough attention to at least speak
Yeah,
to.
yeah, you do.
Um, so Chinese investment, I'd say, and I think Chinese investments started to come in just shortly after I left. I'd say maybe around 2004. My years might be off, but that's when it I think hit the radar for me, right? Um, and the truth of the matter is that the investment has been significant, right? It has been significant enough to where China's just a major player. China is a major player in Zambia, in the rest of Africa. I have friends from the Caribbean that will tell you the same thing. In terms of development, they're involved in the mines, they're involved in agriculture, they're involved in construction, um, everything from residential to commercial level construction. Um, they're involved in our transportation networks. Our major railway, the Tanzania Zambia railway, Tazara, was initially funded by the Chinese way back in the day, right? Early in Zambia's history. And they continue to be an investor or at least a funder, a sponsor of that particular asset. Um, what I'm seeing, and I was doing, as I started to look into the Chamber of Commerce, I started to do some research to try and understand the level of American investment specifically in Zambia. And I was shocked because for some reason I thought it was a lot higher, right? The numbers were a lot higher, but the numbers were pretty low, right? Numbers were pretty low, and I was shocked. Um, and I don't want to get too much into like geopolitics. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the geopolitics of it, but I would have expected that in on a world with different powers, that there would be that different powers would match their investments across the world and levels of influence. So I was shocked about the numbers, but I'm seeing an uptick there. I don't know if you've heard about the Lobito corridor,
Mm-mm.
the Lobito Railway. It's supposed to connect Zambia to Angola,
Mhm.
and to the coast of Angola. So mostly facilitating things like movement of copper. We're looking at, I think, things to do with electric vehicles, the components for electric vehicles. So Zambia is also um, um, kind of pivoting, right? Trying to take
Mhm.
advantage of the
The
shift
pivot.
towards,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's our last
towards,
week's pivot. So this goes well. Yeah.
towards electric vehicles and whatnot. So that's where I'm seeing an uptick.
Yeah.
But I think, and that's why I think that a chamber of commerce becomes pivotal, right? We have to have a seat at the table
Mhm.
uh, uh, in terms of being able to get access to capital for small, medium, large businesses, right? We need to be able to have the kinds of partnerships that are mutually profitable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you, when I started um, getting interested in economics, right? I remember thinking about foreign investment. When foreign investment started coming into Zambia, a lot of times it did not necessarily
Hmm.
um, give Zambians an equity stake, right?
Yes.
Or if there was,
Mm-hmm.
it was a really small stake, and it was not necessarily kind of
Mm-hmm.
a widely enjoyed benefit of having invested foreign investment,
Yep.
right?
Amen.
So the critical thing here is to look at a shift to where if we're going to have foreign investment, it has to be mutually beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
right? It cannot be a one-sided equation um, that is subject to the whims of investors, whether they decide, hey, I just don't want to do Zambia anymore, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
that's the case, we want to be in a position where you still have Zambians that are invested, that
Yeah.
continue with that going concern, right? And
Mhm.
continue to move to generate this economic activity, right, within the nation, right? So that's my view of how we should be looking at these things, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't just be looking at it um, where we roll out the red carpet, but we don't have an equity stake in our
Mhm.
own.
I
Yeah.
love all of that you said, and I just gonna and as you're thinking through the Zambian Economic Chamber of Commerce, I know there's a lot of people who are listening. Hopefully they'll reach out to you, maybe provide some of their thinking, and as you call it, galvanize that. I'm a big supporter. I had a great time in Zambia, but the things you were saying is what I noticed about the organization I was part of. Is that was a really difficult time with the leadership. I had a difficult time with the project was
Mhm.
great, but
Yeah.
having the ability to develop ourselves and put people in key structures in education. And one thing you also said, we look at agriculture, as farming, but there's always support systems, IT,
Yeah.
logistics, all of
Yeah.
these talents that need to come around a particular subject
Yeah.
or particular discipline. And
Yeah.
we are down to the last 4 minutes, but I want to get Zeni's question in here. And so we can read it. I'll give you 2 minutes to answer it as much as possible. And then we're going to start closing out. And like I said, I want to bring you back because I think you've unpacked something that will have, in those key areas that will
Yeah.
require definitely a bigger conversation. So he writes here, loss of power in Zambia has quite literally affected every walk of life, from hospitals and small businesses to students and families just trying to make dinner. In your opinion, how do we begin to wiggle ourselves out of this pickle? Is it purely a government issue, or can communities and individuals take actionable steps to do?
This is a complex one, and I say this is a complex because I'm not necessarily in that industry, but uh, what I know about this particular problem has to do with a lot. So it's beyond just governments, right? So government is part of the equation, but it's not the only variable, right? So one, there is the history of energy generation and energy supply in Zambia, right? So the history has been that starting early in the life of our country, right, the nation, the um, energy company Zesco, right, heavily um, 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 subsidized energy, right, and so we've kind of inherited this legacy, and it's extended over time, and we're at a point where our energy tariffs are way below regional tariffs, and in fact are somewhat below the cost of generation, of power generation, right? So in a sense, our energy company is taking a loss. They are able to kind of almost break even because export some of that energy, right, at higher rates than what Zambians pay to other countries, Namibia being one of them. So, right, that helps balance out the scales. Now, because our costs of production are so low, right, the challenge is when investors are looking at coming in, they have to be able to, or when capital, let's not even just say investors, when capital's coming in,
Yeah,
you have
60 seconds. So we're
you
going
have
to
to
finish in 6
rationalize
seconds.
that cost.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to rationalize that cost. So that's where a lot more thought needs to come in. A lot more innovation needs to come in terms of making that happen. But we've had a number of solar plants come in the last year or so. So that's at least is starting to help. But it's a long discussion. It's not an
Yeah.
easy one. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
that's why when you start to put your glasses up like that, it's like, oh man, I gotta have to cut in because no, but I just really love it. We are going to have this discussion again. As you know, we looked at I think Zambia kind of as a baseline, but I think what you talked about impacts other African countries. And so just to land the plane here, what are your again in 60 seconds, what is your word to Africans wanting to come to the US and or a word of encouragement of those who are back in Africa. And again, I know how you're tie-in with the African think tank. What do you see as maybe some potential partnerships, or even speak about the African think tank and its
Yeah.
impact on
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. I'm what I'm excited about is more African integration from an economic perspective. So things like the uh, free African continental free trade area. I don't know if I got those in the right order, right? So this opening up of borders for commerce, right? Being able to travel across African countries. I think there's a huge opportunity on the continent in agriculture, right? We have markets on the African continent. We have the ability to produce, right? And I think we have to start thinking that the world has a lot of opportunity for us, right? You have to get beyond the narrative of the 80s and 90s that was glim and dire, right? I think there's a lot of opportunities, and we have to think a lot more ambitiously than we've thought in the past, right? That is the message that I have, right? We have to think ambitiously. We have to think cutting edge, right? Not just following what the trend is. We have to be right there, right? How do we take advantage of the things that are cutting edge, and how do they impact the average Zambian, the average African? The opportunity is not just in America; it's all over the world. We just have to think differently. If
Yeah.
we can't think outside the box, we need to create new boxes. Right?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to close up here. People are asking how they get connected with you. I think in the messages there, can you get on there, just write your email, or if people have more questions? And yeah, Denis, I think this would be a great conversation. I need to get you guys connected and have a more of an open dialogue because I think a lot of Zambians have tuned in to this particular because it's a fellow Zambian, but also Africans. This is something we need to unpack. I'm going to close with this. The African think tank had its first mixer or initiative in Africa just would be yesterday, or it was today, but since they're ahead in Accra, Ghana, it was the Diaspora Dialogues Bridging Africa and the HBCU Legacy. So Dr. Sidomi Niba, the founder and executive director, was the main speaker there. Dr. Michael Osei, whose brother's on the board here, but he initiated that along with Kimberly Nelson. She represents the Charlotte base of the African think tank. They were there, and also with Dr. Valerie Kinloch, the president of JCSU, which is an HBCU here. And so a lot of things that you had mentioned, Tiniso, were part of that conversation, or to embed it. How do you connect the African diaspora, Africans back home with HBCUs, looking at economic empowerment, at partnerships, at fitting in, finding space in the boxes that exist, or to your point, building new boxes, right? And so those are the things that we looked at. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the African Think Tank's first initiative on the continent, which is in Accra, Ghana, and to go other places, possibly in Zambia, maybe to spearhead that. And I know those conversations are happening in the higher ups. I kind of navigate in the grassroots like the conversations. But again, thank you so much, brother.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be able to share, my thoughts, my ruminations on Africa, being African, being Zambian, and what we need to bring to our community, right?
Correct.
So, thanks so much.
So to all the guests, thanks for being here. To all my friends in Zambia, we got Patrick and Mary and Nomsa and a whole bunch of people back home who I sent the link to. Jump on this. Your country is being represented. So you're out here, and I know people like Tiniso represent you guys, and I'm also thinking of what you're doing back home. Again, next episode of the African Think Tank. I think we're going to skip next week because we have the mixer, which is our pitch Thursdays. So if your business looking for opportunity to pitch, send us your information. We'll be back a week after that. Okay. I thank you. I appreciate you, and we'll be in touch.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Angie. Well, we had a great conversation. So thank you, guys. People are still kind of tuning in. I wish we could go longer, but they're gonna be like, you didn't cut the. So again, thank you, Tiniso. We'll be together.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.